Would you please stand for the reading of God's holy word? Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 12. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you, a land with large flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You may be seated.
Just so I feel better about myself, is there anybody else who has not put away a single Christmas decoration yet? Okay, good. There's a few hands out there. So that's on my to-do list for this week, and one of the things that we do is we take all of the Christmas cards that we get every year, and I have a little spot where I hang them up in our kitchen, and that way everybody can see them and look at them. And so as I take them down over these next few days, I'll spend some time reading them again, and you know, occasionally there'll be that really, really good one that has the letter. You know, that single page, 10-point type, single-spaced letter. You're laughing. So I assume that I'm not the only one who has received these letters. And I have to say that if you are the person who writes these letters, I apologize in advance. But here are my thoughts on those letters. If you've never gotten one, let me fill you in on what these are like. Okay, so they usually start off with the sweeping statement about how busy the year has been, and the writer just can't believe where the year has even gone. And then we start with the husband, the hubs. He's working 70, 80 hours a week, got that new promotion at work. Thank God, because now they can go on their yearly vacation to Switzerland. But don't worry, he never misses any of the kids' special events, nor his men's Bible study that he leads every Monday. And then we have wifey. I mean, she's busy, so busy decorating that new house on Fancy Avenue in the midst of baking organic bread for her family for every night's freshly prepared meal, and training for the Boston Marathon, and, you know, crocheting stocking hats for the homeless in the midst of teaching Sunday school and chairing the church bazaar. I don't know how she does what she does. And then we have Tommy, well on his way to being valedictorian, voted homecoming king, and received a standing ovation for his solo of Ave Maria at the holiday pageant. And then we have little Susie. Susie's just amazing, you know. She has the lead in the community ballet. She scored the championship goal in the soccer tournament. She's tutoring kids in her spare time and still volunteering at the retirement home too. I mean, this girl's got a great future. And in the midst of all that, they have the wrap-up. The wrap-up about how, God is good, and Jesus is the reason for the season. And they are praying for me. They're praying for me and my family and our 2015 God bless, see you next year. Have you gotten those kinds of letters? Yes, I have too, a few times. Oh, and if it's a really good one, I forgot, we usually hear, the antics of the family pets too, because we can't leave them out. Yes. Sandy knows, I can see that. You know, there's a name for this. Did you know that there is a name for that? It's the humble brag letter. And they seem to come out only at Christmas time. And sometimes I wonder if the humble brag letter was kind of the gateway to Facebook status updates. You know, there seems to be a lot of things in common there. If I sound a little cynical and maybe a little bit bitter, I apologize. But I have an issue with these things. And I love the tradition and the theory of holiday cards. Even that update letter, I think, is great. You know, we need to connect with people and we need to fill in our lives. But what I have an issue with is the ending of those letters. and attributing overscheduling and overworking and overcommitting and overindulging to God's blessings. That disturbs me to my core. And when we paint that picture for other people, that's what our life is supposed to look like when we are blessed by God, I have real problems with that. And I have to, I feel like I'm kind of confessing about myself a little bit here, because what the real problem is for me is that I become distracted by these things. And I start to play the comparison game. And I read through these and I'm thinking, well, gosh, look what their husbands are doing. And look at their home. And look at their kids. And I start to doubt myself. And I start to doubt my own family and my own home. And granted, that's my issue. And there is a real problem with that. But I think that we also have to take responsibility as Christians for what we're putting out there for other people to see as what it looks like to be a Christian family and a Christian home. I'm not just distracted by these things. I'm distracted by a lot of things, actually. I get distracted by television shows and by movie scenes. And I get distracted by song lyrics. And I get very distracted by Pinterest and all of these things that I should be making and doing. And I do make some of them, I have to say. But I get distracted by anything that paints a life, anything that paints a picture for me of what it means to have well-adjusted kids and a healthy relationship and a comfortable home. But the problem is, who gives those things that authority to tell me what that's supposed to look like? It's me. And I'm done giving those things that authority. And if you have found yourself in that position, I hope that you are done with that as well. We live in our distracted culture, and in our scripture today that Wendy read, the Israelites were getting ready to enter into a great distraction as well. And Moses knew this. Moses is our speaker here. He wrote Deuteronomy, and it's essentially his farewell speeches. He had been part of their lives for a long time. The Israelites at this point are camped out just east of Canaan. They're getting ready to cross over into that promised land. They've been rescued from slavery, freed from their slavery. They've spent decades in the desert where they've had to rely solely on God's provision. And now here they are getting ready to go into this land that he had promised their fathers. And at this point, the Israelites' faith had been very practical and very dynamic because they saw on a daily basis God providing for them and God interacting with them. Can you imagine how powerful that must have been to know that you would go to bed with nothing, but when you woke up, everything that you needed was going to be right there for you? And they're just steps away from crossing into this land of milk and honey and riches, none of which they deserved and none of which they had created themselves. And we might expect a celebration, a big party. Shouldn't they be celebrating? Shouldn't Moses be throwing them a big feast and saying, isn't this wonderful? You're getting ready to go and have this amazing experience and God is fulfilling his promise. But instead, he's very stern and he's kind of authoritative. And see, he recognizes that their lives are about to completely change. And they probably knew it too, but they couldn't anticipate what he was anticipating. He knew the distractions that were going to come with wealth and with plenty. And I think he was a little bit concerned that these people who had gone through hardship, who had felt fear and felt anxiety, that they were going to forget that God had delivered them from all of that. And he's especially concerned for the future. How are future generations who are born in this promised land, who will never have experienced the hardship of their ancestors, who will never have experienced that total dependence on God that their parents and their grandparents experienced, how are they going to know God in that way? And let's not forget that this is his farewell speech. He's not going with them. The leadership is getting ready to change. And so he's not going to be there to teach them and to remind them and to fill that role that, frankly, he had filled for their ancestors. So he creates a blueprint for them. And it's a blueprint to be implemented through the family and through the community to safeguard that faith for the future generations. And I would imagine that audience probably, in terms of demographics, in terms of ages and things like that, probably didn't look that much different from what we have here. There would have been children there hearing this message and knowing the expectations that he was placing on the adults in their lives. And there would have been parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and widows and widowers and teenagers, you name it, they would have all been there together to hear this. So as we move forward in this and we start talking about family and parents, keep in mind that, the definition of family can be very small and it can be very large. And we want to think of it in the very large context. So Hebrews tells us that the Word of God is alive, that it's powerful. And so I like to think of this blueprint not just as something that Moses was handing down to the Israelites, but something that is very applicable to us today. So I want to make sure that we talk about it in those terms. So the first directive that he gives them, that Wendy read, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Your heart and my heart. And that's where it starts. The first step in safeguarding the faith of future generations is to begin with yourself. You've probably heard many, many times, you cannot give away what you do not have. You cannot expect your children and your grandchildren and Hillside children to develop a faith if it's not within you first, if you don't have it to share. And the fact is, that who we are, it already impacts our kids. They get a front row seat, don't they, to everything in our lives. They witness all of it, and they're watching. They see how you spend your time. They see how you spend your money. They see how you treat other people that you are in relationships with. And they absorb every single second of it. Have you ever been in a room where one person just kind of spontaneously starts looking up at the ceiling or out the window? Eventually, what happens? I've seen it as a school teacher. What happens? If one person starts looking out the window, what happens? Everybody starts looking. It's kind of like that with our kids, isn't it? Where we're looking is where eventually they're going to look too. And if we want their eyes to be on God, our eyes have to be on God. It's that simple. This has to start with us, and it has to be in our hearts. A few weeks ago, I'd gotten my husband a Bible before we went to Guatemala. He's a good instance of somebody who was raised in the church but not raised in Jesus Christ. That may be a story for another time. But I had gotten him a Bible, and we got the little indexes for him to put in there. Have you seen the little tabs so that you can easily find your spot? And so he was sitting in the living room just putting his tabs in, not doing anything. And the girls were watching TV or something, I think. And just spontaneously, Caitlin went upstairs, and she brought her Bible down, and she was looking at her dad's and checking out his tabs. And, well, do I have that in my Bible? And starts flipping through. And granted, it didn't lead to any kind of big, deep discussion, but she was curious. Her dad had his Bible out, and he was messing with it. So what does she do? She gets her Bible. She starts messing with it. Don't underestimate those kinds of things. Kids are watching. So the second directive, he says, impress them on your children. And I love that word choice, impress. It's not suggest. Well, I think maybe you should love God. Impress them. And I like to think of it more like imprint them. Imprint this into their hearts. And when I first read that, again, I have to share stories with you because that's what I do. When Caitlin was about 2, we decided that we were going to make the little, the hand impressions in plaster. Have you ever seen those kits to make the little stepping stones? And I had this vision for family gifts of these perfect little imprints, these hands in this plaster. And we would put her initials on there and the year, and it was going to be this great gift. So we mixed up the plaster, and we poured it into the cast, and we get Caitlin. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do this with a 2-year-old or not, But this is kind of how it goes, So you take the 2-year-old's hand and you push on their palm so they'll spread their fingers out. Because, again, it has to be perfect. This is for a gift. 2-year-olds don't always understand that. And you get her hand close to the plaster, and it's so perfect. And then you get really close to the plaster, and the hand goes like that. And digs and squishes into the plaster. It's hard to make a really good imprint. It's messy. And a lot of times it requires do-overs. And it takes a whole lot of patience. And sometimes you got to keep in mind your audience, and you realize that maybe doing that with a 2-year-old just isn't going to work. And maybe that particular tactic has to wait until they are a little bit older. But impressing our faith on our kids is the same way. Their hearts are that squishy little thing. And we have to be patient, and we have to keep trying, and we have to keep talking. And sometimes we have to make mistakes and then do them over and change our tactics. And it's hard, but it's our directive. It's our directive from God as mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles and godparents and just people in the neighborhood who have exposure to kids. It's all of our directive. And some of us are resistant to that because what Moses is ultimately telling us is that we are responsible for discipling our children. Old Testament families knew that, and New Testament families knew that. But today we don't really know that. I mean, after all, if it's our responsibility, what are we doing here? Why do we come to Sunday school? Why do we go to Friends Club? Why do our kids come to youth group? If it's my job to disciple my kids, well, isn't that what all of you are paid for and what all of you are devoting your time to, is to disciple my kids? But the fact is that as parents, we have about 3,000 hours a year with our kids. In the church, if we're lucky, and depending on how involved the family is, church leaders get about 40 hours a year with our kids. Who's going to have the most influence? And granted, churches have a responsibility too, so I'm not saying quit coming to all of our programs. That's a conversation for another time, okay? We have a responsibility too, and we'll get there. And this challenge can feel really impossible. It can feel really overwhelming. You might be thinking, but I am so busy, and now you want me to devote all of these hours to teaching my kid about God? How am I even supposed to do that? And Moses gives us the answer for that, because he says in the scripture, talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and get up. That's it. Doesn't sound too hard to me. It sounds like those instances are all things that are already happening in my family, and I would imagine that they probably are already happening in your family as well. I mean, do you sit down? Yeah. Do you get up? You do. Do you walk? I might insert drive there, but let's think about it. When do you have a more captive audience than when you're driving in your car? And there's actually, here comes the nerd, there's all kinds of research that shows that with teenagers, having discussions in the car is one of the best places because you can't look at them. You don't make direct eye contact. You're driving and you're looking ahead. And so when you're wanting to have some of those serious conversations, it's less threatening in the car because you're not staring face on. So I know you didn't ask for that. There's your freebie from today. Do we go to sleep? Yes. Do we wake up? Yes. These are all natural things that happen in our homes. And so what Moses is saying is take those natural rhythms and use them. It's not about adding extra things in. It's about being intentional about how you use that time. What would happen if you spent 2 minutes at mealtime praying before you ate? You're not adding anything. You're just being intentional about what you're talking about. What would happen if you took 5 minutes to tuck your child into bed? Even teenagers, don't let them kid you. They want to be tucked into bed sometimes. I could be lying about that, but I'm going to say that they want to be tucked in. What would happen, though, if you took those 5 minutes to say, what were you thankful for today? Did you come across anybody who could use some prayers today? And you pray together. What would happen if in those few minutes in the car, on the way to school, or on the way to a practice, or on the way to a class, you just ask the questions? How'd you see God working in your day today? And don't be afraid to share how you saw him working today. Because if you're not willing to talk about your faith, your kids won't be either. It has to start with you. We have to figure out how to use these natural rhythms to deliberately bring God into the conversation. And that's what it's about, being intentional and being deliberate. And I would anticipate that some of you are sitting there thinking, well, that's really nice in theory, but you don't know me, and you don't know how broken I am, and you don't know my kids and what a hot mess they are, and how am I supposed to influence my kids when either I don't even really know what I believe, I'm not even sure how spiritual I'm feeling, or my kids are already grown and they're a mess. I have failed at this. And those are all really valid. They are so valid. You know, as parents, we don't always feel really spiritual ourselves, and we don't always know how to lead them. But I think it's okay for us to learn and grow along with our kids. If you've ever helped a child with Saxon math homework, you know that sometimes you just have to dig in there and read the book yourself, right? It's no different with our faith. It's okay for us to learn and grow with our kids, whether our kids are 5 months old or 5 years old or 15 or 50. Those conversations need to continue. And it's okay for them to see that we don't have all the answers. We're not supposed to have all of the answers. It's kind of the point. But we can work through it with them. One more visit with Moses before we go. He says, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. If we were Jewish, we would take this very, very literally. And when I first read this, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. But I think what Moses is saying is that every part of our lives needs to show who we are as Christians. That we need to embody that. And it has to be authentic, because kids can sniff out a fake from a mile away. You can talk the talk, but if you're not walking the walk, they're going to know. And they're going to call you out on it. And so what I think it means to be authentic in this sense is to ask yourself, are you the same Christian at home as you are sitting in these seats right now? You know, it kind of goes back to what Chris was saying with the children. It's not okay to just talk about them at home. We got to talk about them when we're out too. Are you the same Christian at Walmart as you are sitting in these seats? What about driving along the road when somebody cuts you off? Are you the same Christian in your car as you are in these seats? People are laughing, so I'm guessing not. And it's hard. Are you the same Christian driving along the road when you see somebody who needs help and it's not on your agenda to stop and help them that day? You have to take it home with you. You have to take that Christian that you are here and take it home and take it into your community and take it into your world. And that's how our kids see it. That's how they know that it's real. And that's how they're going to know what it looks like to love God and to trust God and to be the hands and feet of Jesus in this world. I hope I've sparked some introspection today, maybe even a little bit of pushback, and that's okay. I'd love to talk with you more about this if you're thinking, I don't buy this. I want to know what this is really supposed to look like. I'd love to have that conversation with you. But my goal is to challenge you, not to make you feel guilty. I think Chris has already established that guilt is not something that comes from God. So if you're sitting there thinking, man, I've really messed my kids up, let it go. It's a new year, right? It's a new start. Let it go. Good, there's no kids here. They might start singing. But I want to challenge you to cultivate and to nurture your own relationship with God. And that my prayer is that you're going to take him home today, that you're going to nurture and cultivate your family's relationship with God, your friends' relationship with God. Don't leave him here in an empty sanctuary when we've all gone home. Take him home, share him with your family, and watch your lives flourish in a way that even a humble brag letter can't do justice to.